Guys, it's Sandy with Sandy Cogdell Designs, and today I have this really fun shaker card. It's a birthday card. I have created it with the new stamp set by Kat Scrappiness. It is called Fabulous Feathered Friends. It's just an adorable set. I've done a couple cards with it, and I just love it. It's got all these great little tropical themed, flamingo themed sentiments on it. It's just perfect. I love it. Next, I will be using it's called the Stitch Scallop Collage frame. And this is what I use to make the little wells for my shaker card. That's the preferred way I like to make shaker cards. I think it's easier than messing around with foam tape. So I will show you how I do that with this particular die. Additionally, for the outside of my card, I am using from the fall frame this outside edge, which cuts a perfect A2 card. And it helps you line up the die on top of it because you've got that stitching. Let me show you real quick. So you see how perfectly that kind of all lines up? It's really helpful for getting your card on straight, because I know I have a hard time doing that sometimes. And then, of course, since it is a shaker card, I will be using Kat Scrappiness, this embellishment mix. It's called Flirty Flamingo. I love it. It's got a really pretty fuchsia color to it. And I made sure that my little flamingos actually match that shaker color. So let's get started. All right, I am going to start out with my three little ladies here, and we are going to color them in. I've got them kind of fussy cutted out. Cut it out, that's not really a word, but they are cut out. I'm going to be using Copic markers. I am just going to do the pink on this very first flamingos, just to show you which colors I'm using and how I'm doing my shading. If you've watched any of my videos before, I always say that when I do my Copic coloring, I do my lightest color and I color in the whole piece that I'm working on. And there's actually two reasons for that. It wets the paper and it helps me with my other blending. So that's the biggest reason. And the second reason is, as I'm coloring it in, it's kind of helping me get familiar with the image and kind of get a lay of the land. So I find that helpful also. The first color I am going to be using is RV52. My mid color is going to be RV55. And then my darkest color is RV17. And when I use that really dark color, I don't use very much of it at all. I am just kind of emphasizing where I think a shadow might be, like underneath a wing or right where that tail feather hits the body, or the other wing that's kind of like behind. Next, I'm coloring in their little beaks, and I'm just coloring in that center portion. And the two colors that I'm using are YR16 and then YR09. And I actually could have thrown in another color in there. It's kind of on the edge of being big enough for three colors, but I decided I'd just go ahead with these two. I think that was enough. For the very tips of their beaks, I'm going to be using T2. No, I'm not. I'm using T4 and T6. And I don't use those colors very often. I don't really know why, but those markers tend to be really juicy. So I am removing both ends of that marker, the chisel end, hopefully to alleviate any type of splotching or bleeding that might happen as I'm using these markers, especially when they're that juicy. I'm going to jump down and work on their legs next. Again, I'm using the same color combination that I used for their little beaks. I am using YR16 and YR09 is my darkest color. Now I know that flamingos do not have feathers on the top of their heads, so I'm assuming the artist on this decided to put little hats or little fascinators on them. So that's how I'm going to treat them. I'm going to color each one of those a different color just to give them their own little personality. For this first one, I am using BG32 and BG34 as my darker color. I'm also going to color in their little drinks with that color and the little necklace on that very last one to the right. And for that little green fascinator on the very right hand side, we're going to be using YG21, YG25, and just a touch of YG17. Again, these are really small things, so you could get by with just 2 colors on them very easily. And the little fascinator in the middle is going to be colored with a lighter pink combination. So I'll be using RV21 as my light, RV13, and then RV04. And that's actually a color combination I used to color the flamingos on another card if you want your flamingos to be a little bit more pink and not quite so fuchsia in color. And then for the little sunglasses and the little twirly straw and some other areas in that, we're going to be using yellow. And the colors I used were Y00 or Y00 and Y08, very small areas. So not a lot of coloring needs to be done in them. For Mr. Toucan here, who I'm assuming is their chaperone, I am going to be using the toner grays again. Now, even though I have a couple of black markers in my Copic collection, I very rarely use black. I don't think you really need to use black. You can get by with those darker gray colors to give the illusion of black. To me, that's just how I treat black. So I'm going to start with the T2, which is my very lightest color. That's what's going to be the highlights on him. Then I will move into T4 and then T6. And I'm just going to hit those areas where his feathers would be. The darkest gray that I am using on him is T9, and that one is almost black, and I'm just going to use that at the top of his head, kind of where that it's not a tuft, but where those feathers come down. And then I'll also use that just to do a little bit more shading in those areas that would be increases or in a background area. Again, my T markers are new and not used very often, so they're super, super juicy. That's why I've got both lids taken off of it. For his dapper little Hawaiian shirt, I'm going to be using the same color combination that I used for my little flamingos up above. So that is going to be RV52 as my lightest color, RV55 is the mid color, and RV17 is my darkest color. And one thing I like to do when I'm coloring and planning out the colors of my card is I want to use colors and kind of space them around so the eye is drawn from like the top where the flamingos are down to the corner where he is, and then I've got that same color purple just a little bit in the drink to the side and a little bit on that rolling luggage. For his skinny little legs and around his eye, I'm going to be using my yellow combination. So again, that's Y00 or Y00 and Y08. Not a lot of shading again, very small areas. To keep his beak colorful, but not add in any more colors, I'm going to be using my green combination, which is YG21, my lightest color. My mid color is YG25, and my darkest is YG17. And this is an area large enough to be able to use those three colors. That center section of his beak is going to be that turquoise blend. So that is going to be BG32 and BG34. And I could have used another color in there, but to be honest, I just didn't have it out on my desk. For his little fancy coconut drink, we are using E53 as my lightest color, and then I'm going to come back in with a little bit of E35 just to do a little bit of shading around his little feathers that are holding the drink. And then off camera, I just went ahead and colored in the little luggage and the little drink so that we could move on to building our shaker card. Now, this is my preferred method of making a shaker card. I think it's a very clean, very stable way of doing it. Some people think it's a waste of paper. I just like it for a lot of different reasons. So what I'm using here is I am using the Stitched Scallop Collage craft die, and I have cut out 6 of that particular die from 110-pound paper, and that is going to give me a well big enough for my pieces to move around. Now, if I were putting in clay pieces in this shaker card, I might even increase that up to 7 or 8 layers. Just because those tend to be bigger and cause problems in the shaker, so I like to make sure I have enough room for those. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take 5 of these and I am going to glue them all together, and what that's going to do is just create a very solid piece that creates the wells. I'm going to use the outside frame from the fall frame craft die to cut out the black cardstock, which is going to create a very nice border around my shaker elements. Okay, so I said that I cut 6 of the little collage pieces, but I've only glued together 5, and the reason for that is I want that 6th one to be the one I use to actually lay out where I'm going to place that on my card. So I'm just going to take that one piece and line it up on that black cardstock. One of the reasons I love that die that I used from the fall frame is it's got stitching marks, and that helps me to get that piece centered nicely. When you cut out all those little collages, you will have a lot of extra pieces left over. So I'm going to use those to actually fill in the little window openings. I'm not going to use a pattern paper there, and I'm not going to use anything that's real bright and bold, just because the pieces that we've colored are going to go on top of the windows, and the shaker bits are going to be colorful enough. So I just don't want this thing getting too busy that you can't even tell that it's a shaker card anymore. I'm going to start with my largest little window there. I'm using Squeezed Lemonade Distress Oxide ink, and then I'm going to take one of my smaller blending brushes and just hit those edges with a little bit of Mustard Seed Distress Oxide ink. And then when I'm happy with the shading on that, I'll go ahead and just glue it into that opening. Next window opening I'm coloring is the one that's going to be behind my little toucan. I'm going to use Carved Pumpkin as my main color on that, and then I'm just going to come back in with a little bit of Ripe Persimmon just to hit those edges and give it a little bit of dimension. Again, we're not doing real dark colors. And last but not least, I will be doing a pink window behind my little rolling luggage along with the little fancy drink. I will be using, or I am using, Spun Sugar Distress Oxide ink, and I will go back in with a little bit of picked raspberry on those edges. Now, one thing I'll share with you is I do a lot of work on my glass mat, and one of the things I do to clean it is I have a little bottle of rubbing alcohol. Water will clear off the ink usually, or mostly, but it doesn't dry nearly as quick as the rubbing alcohol. So I'm generally in a hurry all the time. So that's what I use to clean off the surface of my glass mat. Now that I have both of those windows finished, I will glue them in those two little openings, and we are ready to move on to constructing the wells. Now I'm taking that piece that we glued all the little collage frames together, and I'm going to put that right on top of where I've got my little windows laid out and give it a good press. To fill in my little windows, I am using the Flirty Flamingo mix by Kat Scrappiness. And she has so many different kinds of embellishments, it's almost hard to pick. I could have used a combination of pinks and oranges, but I just loved this Flirty Flamingo, and I actually colored my flamingos to match that mix. So that's what we're using on this particular card. I love this mix. It's beautiful. I used about half of the bag, so there still is enough to do another shaker card for sure. I've sealed up my little shaker with a piece of acetate that was cut just a little bit smaller than the actual outside edge of the shaker card. I didn't want any of that white acetate hanging over. I have used that die then to cut a piece of pink cardstock, and that's going to be put on top of my acetate, and that's the frame for all of those windows. And I think it's just a beautiful, beautiful card, even before we put on the little friends. Gosh, it's almost a shame to cover up those little windows with all those beautiful little embellishments inside, but we must. So I'm going to just use liquid glue, and I'm going to glue on all of those little pieces that we've colored just to decorate the front of that card. I am not going to pop them up because this card is thick enough just with making the wells. So we don't want to get too carried away, even though part of me wanted to do that. For the sentiment on the front of this card, I am using the one that says "Shake Your Tail Feathers," and I have just stamped that out on a piece of white cardstock. And I actually did use one of my pink markers to kind of just color in that upper edge just to kind of tone down the harshness of it. And then I glued it on a piece of yellow cardstock just to give it a little bit of strength, since it's actually bridging the top part of that one window. And then all we have left to do is put it on a card base. So my card base is a piece of white cardstock that is cut to 5.5 by 8.5, and I have scored it at 4 1/4 and folded it. For the inside of my card, I like to make that a little bit heavier because there's so much weight going on that front part of the card that I always feel like the inside feels a little bit flimsy if you don't do something with it. So I went ahead and actually stamped "Have a Flamazing Birthday" on that center or that inside piece, and I'll go ahead and get that glued in. That piece is cut to 5 1/4 by 4 inches. And like I say, that just gives a nice finish. For the front of my card, I will be using liquid glue to adhere that on there. A lot of people use double-sided tape, and I used to do that, but I have found over the long haul, the double-sided tape seems to lose its stickiness. And it might just be because the climate here is so dry that it dries out the tape. So I use liquid glue to adhere the front of my cards on all of my card bases. It's pretty rare that I would use double-sided adhesive. I am definitely a liquid glue girl. And that completes this card. I will go ahead and link all the products I use down below in the description, along with a link to Kat Scrappiness. Please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video and subscribe to my channel. You can also follow me on Instagram at Sandy Cogdill or on my blog, sandycogdilldesigns.com. Thank you for spending a little bit of your day with me today, and until next time, bye-bye.